Hello, my name is Jake. I studied biblical history at Moody Bible Institute, and today I'm sick. But I still want to talk about the Bible. And today I want to talk about the symbology or the symbolism of marriage within the biblical narrative and the way that marriage is sort of woven throughout the story of the Bible and how important that story is. And there's a lot of times where you'll see the structure of marriage or symbols from marriage used throughout the Bible in this way that it pushes the story forward, sort of putting us as the bride and Jesus as the groom, and creating this beautiful story that shows the importance of marriage both in our lives and in the story of the Bible. But yeah, let's just start by laying a basic groundwork. The Bible talks about marriage a lot, and there's a lot of it that you can get, especially Song of Solomon is really good. Genesis gives some good detail, but there's a lot of the cultural aspects that aren't really talked about as much in the Bible that you kind of have to look to some outside contemporary sources to be able to see. And you can see a lot of those things in the Bible, even if the Bible doesn't specifically say, this is how marriage works here. But you can see those details shining through. And the way that marriage worked in the first century is oftentimes the family of the groom would find a bride and say, this is going to be your bride. We have chosen this person. A lot of times it would be, hey, we're going to marry this family because this family is important, or this family is significant. And it was important because a lot of the importance that people had back in biblical times was based on their name. It was, well, actually, a great example. If you go to Israel today, there's a lot of people whose last names are Ben something. So, for instance, my tour guide over there, his last name was Ben Moshe. And Ben means son of, or so it would be son of Moshe, or Moses. And so, my name, for example, if I was born and lived over there, my name would be Jacob Ben Matthew. And it's so significant over there because that's how your identity is formed. They would say, hey, you are so-and-so, the son of so-and-so. And so to be from a significant family lineage was really important back then. And a lot of that is carried through in the way that we look at the Bible, because you have the descendants, you say, who is the descendant of who? So for instance, it talks about people being of the line of David, or of the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or of the line of Moses. And those were significant because those were the things that gave you value as a person in this culture. It wasn't enough that you had built your own name, but looking back to who you came from was really, really important. And so because of that, people wanted to marry into these important names, or these important families, or families of power in different areas. And a great example of that in the Bible is in Genesis. It's going to take me a second to find it. But the story of, it's later on in Genesis, Abraham has his child, Isaac, and Isaac has a wife, Rebekah, and Rebekah was chosen for Isaac. And let me just find the exact place. Yeah, so in Genesis 24, let me just read some of this because it's important to talking about the image of marriage. Starting in verse 1, Abraham was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the senior servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I am living, but will go to my country and to my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac. The servant asked him, what if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country from which you came? Make sure that you do not take my son back there, Abraham said. The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying, to your offspring I will give this land, he will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son under, do not put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham, and swore an oath to him concerning this matter. Then the servant left, taking with him 10 of his master's camels, loaded with all of his good things from his master. He set out for Aram Naharaim, and made his way to the town of Nahor. He had the camels kneel down near the well outside of the town. It is towards evening, the time of the women to go out and draw the water. Then he prayed, Lord God of my master Abraham, make me successful today, and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a young woman, please let down your jar that I may drink, and she says, drink, and I'll water your camels too, let her be the one who you have chosen for your servant Isaac. So this part of the story talks a lot about how the servant was chosen to go find a wife. It wasn't like dating today where you look at someone and you say, oh, that person's really pretty, or oh, that person seems really cool. Your spouse was chosen for you back in this time, and it was because of that importance of marrying into those families. And then the story proceeds where Rebecca comes out to get water. She gives water to the servant, and then also to the camels. And then she's asked to go back and to marry into Abraham's family, to marry Isaac. And she agrees. And this is really important because women didn't have a lot of rights back in biblical times. But this is one place where she had the full right to refuse. And Abraham even says that. He says, hey, if she refuses to go with you, you're not held to this covenant anymore where you have to go find a wife. You're released. If she says no, you have done your part. And women had the right back in this time to be able to say, no, I don't want to marry into this family. And which is actually really interesting because it's a lot more right than the son had, where his father would say, I'm going to go find you a wife. But anyway, later on in the story, let's see. Tells the story. She quickly lowered her jar. Get further on. And then it says, Rebecca and her attendants got ready and mounted the camels and went back with the man. So the servant took Rebecca and left. Verse 62, Now Isaac had come from Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev. He went out into the field one evening to meditate, and as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebecca also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, Who is the man in the field coming to meet us? He is my master, the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself. Then the servant told Isaac all that he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So in this story, this is really early on, before the nation of Israel, before Moses. This is very, very early Bible history. And at this point, this is before a lot of the traditions would be formed. But in this time, a father, for instance, would go out, find a wife, bring them to his son. The wife had the right to be able to say no, and then she would marry into this family, and the families would be joined, and that created the lineage that would pass down to the next generation. Later on in the Bible, the tradition would change to where the couple would get engaged, and for a year, the son would go and build an extension onto his father's house, and that would be the place where the couple would live once they got married. And this is something that is referenced later on in the Bible, and we'll get back to that later. But that first story of marriage that we see in the Bible, or the first time where it really talks about the process of marriage. Of course, there's people mentioned before who got married. For instance, Abraham and Sarah, several other people. It mentions that they got married, but it doesn't mention the process of going out and finding the wife and bringing her. But that's an early example. And then later on in the Bible, that process of what I was talking about, especially Song of Solomon, talks a lot about marriage. We get into this process of what a marriage would look like. So, for example, the son would build an extension onto his father's house as a place for him and his wife to live. And something else that's very interesting is that because the father was the one who would go out and find the wife and would say, this is how we're going to do this wedding, the father was also the one who got to say, hey, it's time for the wedding. The father of the groom was always in charge of setting up the wedding, making sure that everything was put together, and then no one else knew when the wedding was going to happen. He was in charge of all the planning, and then when he decided it was time, then it was time. And that's when people would come together, they'd be ready to go. And this becomes very interesting later on, because Jesus calls back to this in the parable of the bridesmaids with the lamps. And it talks about how the bridesmaids have to be ready for the bride. And they have to, actually, let me find, modern technology helps a lot with this. Let me find the exact page of that parable of the bridesmaids. Matthew 25. So let's look at that. Because I think that it's really interesting being able to look at the way that marriage is portrayed in the Bible. I think it's really important as well. Matthew 25. The parable of the 10 virgins. So Matthew 25:1. At that time the kingdoms of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps but did not take any oil with them. The wise ones, however, took oil in the jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight the cry rang out, "Here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all the virgins woke up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish ones said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil. Our lamps are going out." "No," they replied, "there may not be enough for both us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves." But while they were on their way to buy the oil, the bridegroom arrived, and the virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the others also came. "Lord, Lord," they said, "open the door for us." But he replied, "Truly I tell you, I don't know you. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour." And people will look at this passage and they'll point towards the end times and say, you don't know the day or the hour that the end times are coming. And then later on, the Bible also says it'll come like a thief in the night. No one will know the time or the hour. But in this parable, the 10 virgins are the equivalent of modern day bridesmaids, where they would be a part of the processional that would take the wedding party into the banquet, and then they would have this big feast, they would have the wedding, and they had to be ready to go at any point. They knew they were going to be a part of this wedding, and when the father of the groom decided that it was time for the wedding to happen, they had to be ready in the middle of the night at any point to be able to go in and to celebrate this wedding. And when he would have a servant cry out, "The bridegroom is approaching," they would have to be ready to go. And so it's so interesting the way that when Jesus talks about the coming of the end times, he refers to it as in the same way as when the bridegroom approaches to be able to take his wife with him. And then also he refers to the way that he prepares space for us. And he says, "I build a place for you in my Father's house," in the same way that grooms in biblical times would build an extension onto their father's home as a place for the bride to go live with him. And it's that beauty of being able to look at the biblical story and see the way that the symbolism of marriage is used throughout it. Jesus even calls us the bridegroom of Christ and says that we are a part of this story, being married in and being created as a part of that lineage, to where we are the ones who are chosen. We are the ones who God said, "I want them. Go out and get them. They are worthy. They are the ones who I want you to be a part of the same family with." And Jesus came down to earth. He gave a sacrifice for us to be able to pay the price to buy us, to be his bride, and then decided that he wanted to spend eternity with us. And I think this is why the Bible treats marriage so importantly. And I think why we as Christians should also treat marriage very importantly, is because it's a reflection of the relationship that we get to have with Jesus. It's a reflection of the fact that he came down and bought us with a price and said, "I'm going to pay the dowry that's due. I'm going to set up this relationship so that I get to spend the rest of eternity with you." And, right now I'm engaged, even though I'm wearing an engagement ring as a guy, but I'm engaged to be married to my wife. And I'm so excited for it. And I get to plan all of these things right now. And as I'm planning through all these things, it just constantly reminds me of the importance of that relationship with Jesus. Because he didn't come down just to say, hey, you're cool, but whatever. He came down because he chose us. He saw us, wanted us, chose us to be a part of his family. He prepared a place for us. And when the time comes to gather us to him, to bring us to his Father's house, to create that celebration and that time where we get to rejoice because we are now the bride of Christ, we get to wait and anticipate that. And in the time that I am waiting and anticipating my own wedding, I get to be excited as well about the fact that I get to wait and anticipate the time that I get to spend eternity with Jesus in heaven. Because I've accepted him as my Savior, I've said, yes, I want that relationship. And in the same way that I'll get up to that altar and I'll say, I do to my future wife, I also went up to that altar and said, I do to Jesus. Because I want that relationship with him forever. I want to know that he's there to look out after me, to take care of me, and to bring me into his Father's house to where I get to celebrate for the rest of eternity, worshiping Jesus there in heaven. And I hope that you want that same thing too. But as always, if you have any questions or if there's anything you need clarification on, just ask. The comment section is down below. You can just ask me anything, and I'll make a video about it. But yeah, it's just so encouraging to know that Jesus is the unfailing groom, and he will always love us no matter what. And so anytime you feel discouraged, know that Jesus chose you. You are the name that is desired and wanted, and you're the family that he wants to create. Know that you're going to go be with him one day. So thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.